Picture the moment you realize your taxi has no driver. Not the glossy launch event, not the futuristic commercial, the ordinary bit. You have a bag on your lap. Your phone says the car is outside. You open the door, climb in, and the front seat is empty. There is nobody to make eye contact with, nobody to apologize to when you slam the door, nobody to ask whether the shortcut is actually a shortcut. The car is waiting for you. It knows where you asked to go. It is also, in a very literal sense, the person responsible for getting you there. You might find that exciting. You might find it deeply weird. You might do what a lot of people do and immediately ask the question that makes the whole conversation messy. Is it actually driving itself? Or is there a human somewhere doing more than the brochure says? Stay with me, because the interesting story is not that a car can now move through a city without somebody sitting behind the wheel. The interesting story is how long it took to make that sentence true in even the narrowest possible sense. By the end of this video, you will have a simple way to separate three things people constantly blend together: a car that can drive, a driverless vehicle operating inside a defined area, and a robotaxi service that has to find you, pick you up, handle the strange road, answer for the ride, and do it again tomorrow. You will see where the story starts, and it is not with a triumphant prototype. It starts with a machine that cannot finish a race. Here is the number to hold on to: 0. 0 finishers in the first DARPA Grand Challenge in 2004. 15 vehicles reached the final race in the Mojave Desert. The prize was waiting. The course was waiting. The future of autonomous vehicles was, depending on your mood, either about to begin or about to be laughed out of the desert. Then the machine started moving. One vehicle crashed near the start. Another got tangled. Another drove in circles. Carnegie Mellon's Sandstorm went farther than the others, then left the route and got stuck. Its front tires caught fire. No vehicle completed the course. That is the first image in this story. Not a sleek car gliding up to a hotel, but a robot vehicle stranded in the dirt while a prize goes unclaimed. And now ask yourself a question. If you watched that race in 2004, how close would you have thought driverless taxis were? 10 years? 20? Never. The answer eventually was 20 years, but only if you define here very carefully. A desert course looks like a hard place for a machine. There are rocks, dust, slopes, and heat. But it gives the machine one enormous favor: the world is not trying to negotiate with it. Picture this: you are walking through a supermarket where every aisle is marked, every shelf stays still, and every other shopper has been instructed to move at a predictable speed. You can make a map. You can plan a route. You can rehearse the turns. Now remove the instructions. Somebody leaves a trolley sideways. A child runs across the aisle. A delivery worker opens a door into your path. A stranger stops in front of you and changes their mind. You still need to reach the checkout, but the route is no longer just geography. It is negotiation. That is the difference between making a machine follow a route and making it operate in public. Do you feel the problem changing? It is no longer only, can the machine see the road? It becomes, what does the machine do when the road behaves like a crowd? The first race had asked a vehicle to travel from one point to another without a human driving. The machine did not need to interpret a normal city. It needed to survive one specified course. That is not a criticism. It is a useful first step. In engineering, you often make the world smaller before you make the machine better. You control the test. You count the failures. You try again. But a controlled test can make the future look closer than it is. A car that completes one route has demonstrated something real. It has not yet demonstrated a service. 18 months later, the picture changes. In October 2005, the second DARPA Grand Challenge sends vehicles back into the desert. This time, 5 vehicles complete the course. Stanford's Stanley wins, finishing in just under 7 hours. The vehicle is not magic. Its published system is a stack of sensing, mapping, planning, control, and machine learning techniques, assembled into something that can make decisions fast enough to stay on a difficult route. 1 year earlier, 0. This time, 5. If you were watching the numbers, you might think the problem had been solved at astonishing speed. In one sense, it had. The machines had crossed a line that seemed impossible 18 months earlier. But what line was it? It was the line between a robot cannot finish this course and a robot can finish this course. That is a meaningful line. It is not the line between a robot can finish this course and you can trust it to collect your grandmother from the airport in the rain. The course teaches you the first rule of robotaxi history. Success is always attached to an operating domain. An operating domain is the set of conditions in which the system is designed to work: particular roads, speeds, maps, weather, traffic patterns, and boundaries. Change the conditions, and you may have changed the claim. You already understand this in ordinary life. A bicycle that is perfect on a flat bike path has not failed because it is bad at carrying a sofa upstairs. The sofa is a different job. If you ask the bicycle to do it, you have changed the test rather than discovered a secret failure. The trouble with autonomous vehicles is that the marketing sentence often says self-driving, while the engineering sentence is much more specific. The third DARPA challenge makes that specificity impossible to ignore. In 2007, the urban challenge moves the problem into an artificial city. Now the vehicles must deal with traffic. They must follow rules, negotiate intersections, merge, pass, yield, and respond to other vehicles that are not following a script perfectly. The machine is no longer only tracing a line across terrain. It is entering a social environment made of moving objects whose intentions have to be guessed from behavior. You do this without noticing. A car rolls slightly forward at a junction and you estimate whether the driver is going or merely impatient. A pedestrian looks at the road and you wonder whether they have seen you. A vehicle pauses where it should not and you build a prediction from a tiny movement. For a human driver, these are small judgments. For an autonomous system, they are the point of the job. The urban challenge does not turn a race into a city. It does something more useful. It exposes the next layer of difficulty. The vehicle must perceive, it must predict, it must decide, it must act, and it must do all four while other agents are changing the problem underneath it. That is why this story is not simply a parade of better sensors and faster computers. The machine improves, but the world also becomes less cooperative. There is another reason that race matters. A demonstration creates a common test. Engineers can argue about algorithms, but the course gives them a shared question. Did the vehicle complete the route, obey the rules, and avoid the other cars? That sounds obvious until you remember how many different jobs are hidden inside the phrase self-driving. One team may be improving object detection. Another may be working on a map. Another may be trying to predict what a human driver will do at an intersection. The race puts all of those pieces in one moving machine. Picture this. The vehicle reaches an intersection and nothing dramatic happens. No collision, no applause, no headline. It simply waits, recognizes a gap, and moves through. That ordinary moment is the achievement. A robotaxi will eventually be judged by thousands of moments that look like nothing at all. The public never sees the successful prediction that prevented a hard break. It sees only whether the ride felt normal. Scholars differ over where the robotaxi story truly begins. Some start with autonomous vehicles that could navigate a route. Others start with a passenger service, because a taxi is not defined by the car alone. That disagreement is useful rather than annoying. It reminds you that the word beginning changes depending on whether you are telling a hardware story, a software story, or a service story. Now the story moves from a government-backed research challenge into a technology company. Google's self-driving project dates its beginning to 2009. In 2016, the project presents itself as Waymo, a separate company within Alphabet. Notice what has happened to the shape of the problem. The research team is no longer only trying to prove that a vehicle can perform a maneuver. It is starting to imagine a product people can use. And a product has a strange habit. It creates obligations. If you build a demonstration, the audience may watch it once. If you sell a ride, you expect the car to arrive. You expect the door to open. You expect it to know where the safe pickup point is. You expect the journey to end somewhere sensible. If it gets confused, you expect the system to recover. The road is only one part of the service. The company phase adds a clock that the race did not have. A research vehicle can be taken back to the workshop after a difficult run. A passenger service has to decide whether the vehicle should continue serving, whether the map needs an update, whether a repeated problem belongs to one car or the whole fleet, and how to explain the decision to a person who is already waiting. The technical system becomes an operational system because somebody has paid for an outcome, not for a demonstration. That is also why the public language becomes slippery. Autonomous, self-driving, and driverless can describe overlapping things, but they do not automatically tell you the vehicle's speed, route, weather limits, supervision model, or service boundary. A phrase can be true and still be incomplete. The missing details are not small print around the achievement. They are the conditions that make the achievement possible. Here is the second rule. A robotaxi is not a car with an app attached. It is an operating system for a journey. The vehicle is one layer. The map and the service area are another. The rider interface is another. Fleet maintenance, charging, cleaning, customer support, emergency response, and regulatory permission all sit around the vehicle. You can remove any one of those and still have a very impressive autonomous car. You do not necessarily have a functioning taxi. This is where the word driverless starts doing too much work. In 2017, Waymo begins an early rider program in the Phoenix area. The service is introduced in stages. Riders experience autonomous vehicles inside a bounded geography, under a set of operating conditions that the company can map and monitor. 3 years later, in October 2020, Waymo opens a public fully driverless offering in the Phoenix area. Reuters and the Associated Press describe it as a geographically limited service. The claim is not every car everywhere can now drive itself. The claim is smaller and more concrete. Members of the public can request a ride in a defined area with no human driver in the vehicle. That distinction is not a footnote. It is the product. Picture 2 circles on a map. The first circle is the part of the world the company has decided it can operate in. The second is the part of the world you want to reach. If the circles overlap, you get a ride. If they do not, you get a polite message telling you the car is not available there. The machine has not failed in the same way a taxi driver might fail. The service has simply refused a journey outside its operating domain. You might find that frustrating. You might also recognize it as the reason the service can exist at all. The empty front seat is not the whole miracle. The invisible boundary around the ride is part of the miracle too. Picture this. You are standing outside a hotel with a suitcase, and the app gives you a pickup point a short walk away because the vehicle cannot stop where you first pinned the map. To you, that is an inconvenience. To the service, it is a chain of decisions about curb geometry, traffic, pedestrian safety, the car's stopping behavior, and whether the passenger can identify the right vehicle. The history of robotaxis is full of these unglamorous translations between what a person means and what a machine can safely execute. The public ride is therefore a negotiation between a promise and a boundary. The promise says, "We can take you there." The boundary says, "Under these conditions, through this part of the city, using this support system." If the boundary is too small, the service feels like a novelty. If the promise is larger than the boundary, the service feels misleading. The evolution is the long attempt to bring those two shapes closer together. You request the car from an app. The service needs to know where you are, where it can safely stop, and whether the vehicle can reach you without leaving its approved area. That pickup problem sounds trivial until you watch a human taxi driver solve it. The driver sees the curb, the traffic, the person waving, the bus lane, the construction barrier, and the impatient car behind them. They make a quick judgment about where the passenger can enter without becoming a hazard. The robotaxi has to turn that judgment into a system. It may direct you to a particular pickup point. It may stop short of the place you expected. It may wait. It may ask for help. The ride you experience is the visible tip of a system that is continuously deciding what counts as a legal, safe, and serviceable journey. What does the passenger call that? Usually, they call it the car. That is the strange thing about successful infrastructure. The more layers it contains, the fewer layers the customer is supposed to notice. You do not want to book a taxi and then manage its sensor calibration, software version, or emergency protocol. You want the door to unlock and the ride to end in the right place. The service hides complexity by making the passenger's task simple, but hiding complexity is not the same as removing it. When a human driver is present, many small judgments are absorbed into one person's work. When the driver is absent, those judgments are distributed across code, maps, fleet teams, support staff, and rules. The passenger sees one vehicle. The organization has to maintain the whole chain. That is why the historical jump from race to taxi takes so long. A race can reward completion. A taxi has to manage exceptions. The vehicle must handle the route it knows. The service must handle the situation it did not expect. The difference between those two sentences is where most of the missing years lie. Now we reach the question you asked at the beginning. If nobody is in the driver's seat, is there still a human somewhere helping? The honest answer is that helping is not one thing. In 2026, NHTSA describes remote assistance as a spectrum. At one end, a human confirms or supplies context. Further along, a human may provide guidance or permission. At the other end is fully remote manual driving. Those are different functions. They have different safety implications. They create different responsibilities. Calling all of them remote assistance is like calling a sat-nav, a driving instructor, and a tow truck operator the same kind of passenger. Waymo describes its remote assistance as contextual advice. The vehicle can ask for information, but the company says the vehicle remains responsible for choosing and executing the maneuver. Waymo separately describes an event response team for more complex emergency or post-collision coordination. That is the company's description of its system. It is not a universal definition of driverless operation. Tesla's current rider material describes bounded service areas, passenger support, pullover controls, and information for first responders. Its public filings describe limited driverless testing. NHTSA has asked Tesla questions about supervision, remote operations, and the limits of control authority. The existence of that inquiry does not prove what Tesla does on every ride. It does tell you what the regulator thinks needs to be made clear. Zoox takes another route. It describes a purpose-built robotaxi, remote support, and first responder assistance. In 2026, NHTSA announces a temporary exemption allowing commercial deployment of up to 2,500 Zoox vehicles annually for 2 years. Uber and Motional take a different route again. In March 2026, Uber riders in Las Vegas can be matched with Motional robotaxis in a bounded initial service area. The driving technology belongs to Motional. The marketplace and passenger request belong to Uber. Now look at the picture. Waymo integrates an autonomous system with partner vehicles and operates a branded service. Zoox redesigns the vehicle around the passenger. Tesla combines a consumer fleet strategy with a limited robotaxi service. Uber can supply the marketplace while a partner supplies the autonomous vehicle. They are not four identical cars racing toward one finish line. They are four different answers to the question: who owns the journey when the driver disappears? And this is the permission beat. You do not need to memorize every acronym, sensor type, or automation level to understand the story. You only need to ask three questions. Where is the vehicle allowed to operate? What can it do when the world surprises it? And who is responsible for the next decision? Before you book, you can test the claim yourself. Where are you allowed to ride? What can your vehicle handle? And who helps you when your route changes? That is enough to keep the word driverless from doing all the thinking for you. Notice the distinction between a question and an accusation. Asking who can provide guidance is not the same as claiming that a remote operator is secretly driving every block. Asking where a vehicle is permitted is not the same as saying a bounded service is fake. Precision protects both sides of the story. It prevents a company from receiving credit for a broader capability than it has demonstrated, and it prevents a real engineering achievement from being dismissed because it is not universal. For decades, the road system assumed there would be a human in the vehicle who could see a problem and take responsibility for the next move. Now regulators have to describe vehicles that may not have a steering wheel, may request human context from a distance, may need a special exemption, and may operate as a passenger service rather than as a privately owned car. That is why the policy story matters. The rulebook is not simply checking whether a new model has passed a familiar test. It is deciding which parts of the old human driver model still apply. NHTSA's 2026 actions address automated vehicle standards and exemptions. California regulator records distinguish driver deployment, driverless deployment, and driverless pilot categories. Nevada notices record applications from Tesla robotaxi, Waymo, and an Uber subsidiary for autonomous vehicle network operations. An application is not approval. A permit listing is not a safety ranking. An exemption is not proof that a system works everywhere. But each document tells you something important. A robotaxi is becoming a regulated transport service, not just a research project with a camera on the roof. Think about the difference between a machine and a service in legal terms. If a prototype stops in the wrong place, the research team learns something. If a taxi stops in the wrong place with a passenger inside, somebody has to explain what happened, respond to the passenger, record the event, and decide whether the service should continue. The passenger's ordinary experience creates an extraordinary paper trail. That is the part of the evolution you cannot see from a smooth ride video. You can spend years making a vehicle better at driving and still not have a business that can send it to you on demand. The fleet has to be maintained. The maps have to be updated. The service area has to be defended. Vehicles need energy, cleaning, and repairs. Support teams need to know what kind of help a stalled vehicle requires. Regulators need a description of the system they can evaluate. And the passenger needs a price and a reason to choose it. None of that is as visually exciting as a car turning left by itself. All of it is part of the evolution from demonstration to service. The cost structure follows the same pattern as the technical structure. There is no single bill labeled "make the car autonomous." There are recurring costs for vehicles, sensors, compute, maps, testing, maintenance, charging, cleaning, insurance, customer support, and compliance. A ride can look effortless because the work has been spread across a system that is running before the passenger ever opens the app. Picture this. One vehicle finishes a journey and becomes unavailable for 20 minutes. It needs to charge, be cleaned, receive a software update, or wait for a support decision. A human taxi driver might make a quick personal choice about the next fare. A fleet operator has to model availability across hundreds or thousands of vehicles. The word scale, therefore, means more than adding cars. It means repeating the entire service without allowing the exception rate to consume the business. This is where a robotaxi becomes a financial object, even if the story is not a stock market story. A vehicle that can drive once is an achievement. A fleet that can repeat journeys, recover from exceptions, and carry passengers inside a permitted area is an operating system with costs attached to every layer. You do not have to decide whether the economics will work forever to understand the historical change. You only have to notice that the problem has changed from "can the machine move" to "can the system provide a reliable journey?" Now ask the awkward version. What if the most important technology in a robotaxi is not the car? What if it is the boundary, the map, the dispatch system, the support desk, the rule that tells the car when to stop serving an area, the human who gives context but does not take the wheel? The vehicle is the thing you can photograph. The service is the thing that has to survive contact with reality. There are three ways you can tell this story. The first is the triumph story. In 2004, the machines fail. In 2005, one wins. In 2007, they enter traffic. In 2016, a company forms. In 2020, the public gets a driverless ride. The future arrives one milestone at a time. That sequence is true. It is also incomplete because it makes the years between the milestones look like empty space. The second is the broken promise story. Companies promised self-driving cars soon. The date slipped. The city was harder than the demo. The operating domain stayed small. The word driverless kept changing around the edges. That sequence also contains truth. It explains why public expectations and actual service boundaries still feel so far apart. But it can also flatten every technical advance into failure because the final destination was larger than the first road the machine could handle. The useful test is not which story sounds most exciting. It is which story preserves the size of each claim. The triumph story must admit the boundary. The broken promise story must admit the progress. The system story must admit that a system can be real, useful, and still limited. If you shrink any of those facts to make the ending cleaner, you have made the story easier to tell and less useful to the person listening. You can apply that test to a headline, a launch video, or a ride you take yourself. What did the vehicle actually do? Where did it do it? Which part was automated, which part was supported, and which part was simply outside the service area? Those questions sound less cinematic than "are cars finally driving themselves?" They produce a much sturdier answer. The third is the system story. Each breakthrough solves one layer and exposes another. The desert challenge proves that a vehicle can follow a route. The urban challenge exposes interaction. The company phase exposes operations. The public service exposes responsibility. The regulator phase exposes a legal category that did not quite exist before. This version does not require you to call robotaxis inevitable. It does not require you to call them a fraud. It asks a more useful question. What exactly became possible at each stage, and what remained outside the claim? Which version explains the empty front seat best? A driverless vehicle can still be surrounded by people. People map the roads. People maintain the fleet. People answer support requests. People write the safety cases. People decide where the vehicle is allowed to operate. People inspect a crash. People determine whether the next version is ready. The phrase "no human in the driver's seat" is precise. It tells you something important. It does not tell you that the service contains no human judgment. You already know this from other machines. An elevator can move without an operator inside the cabin. The building still has maintenance staff, emergency procedures, inspectors, and rules about where the elevator may go. Autonomous movement does not mean the surrounding system has stopped being human. This is not a gotcha. It is the normal shape of complicated technology. The more responsibility a machine takes on in public, the more carefully the surrounding system has to define the machine's limits. A robotaxi does not become less autonomous because it has a service area. The service area is part of the autonomy claim. The support function does not automatically make the ride secretly human-driven, but the support function's authority matters. Advice, permission, remote control, and passenger support are not interchangeable words. So when a company says driverless, your next question is not simply, is there a driver? Ask, driverless where, under which conditions, with what kind of support, and with which humans still responsible for the system around the car? Here is the strange success of the robotaxi. If it works, the ride feels boring. You sit down, you look at your phone, the city slides past, you arrive. That is exactly what a transport service is supposed to do. The engineering disappears into the ordinary experience. But ordinary is not the same as solved. The current services operate within boundaries. Companies describe different support systems. Regulators are still defining categories and exemptions. The record does not support one universal robotaxi model, and it does not support one universal meaning of driverless. What it does support is an evolution. From a failed desert race to a completed desert race, to urban interaction, to a corporate project, to a bounded public service embedded in maps, fleets, support desks, and regulation. The front seat is empty because a very long chain of other things is present. That is the part you miss if you tell the history as a sequence of futuristic cars. The vehicle is the visible character, but the plot is the system around it. And the system has been learning in public, one operating domain at a time. Go back to the first image. You open the door. You look toward the front seat. Nobody is there. The first time that happens, the empty seat feels like the story. Now you know it is only the last frame of the story. Behind it is a desert race where nobody finished. A vehicle called Stanley crossing a course in 2005. An urban challenge that forced machines to negotiate with other vehicles. A Google project becoming Waymo. A staged rider program becoming a geographically limited public service. A regulator describing remote assistance as a spectrum instead of a single word. Different companies making different bets about the vehicle, the map, the marketplace, and the human layer around the ride. The robotaxi did not arrive when a car learned to move. It arrived when moving became a service with boundaries, responsibilities, and a passenger waiting at the curb. And that service is still telling you, in small ways, what it can do and where it stops. The next time you see a driverless car, do not just look for the person who is missing from the front seat. Look for the invisible map around it. Ask which roads count. Ask what happens when the car meets the strange thing. Ask who answers when the system needs help. Because the history of robotaxis is not the story of a machine replacing a driver in one dramatic leap. It is the story of a controlled experiment slowly becoming a public obligation. That took 20 years to become visible. And it is still becoming something.